I hate to break up the networking. It appears everyone's having a great time. We want to welcome all of you to the Catholic University of America. It's an honor for us to host today's Potomac Conference, and I want to extend my sincere thanks and gratitude to the Greater Washington Board of Trade, the Greater Washington Partnership, the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, and the Consortium of Universities of the Washington metropolitan area for their collaborative efforts in helping to organize this really important event. What could possibly be more important than the health and safety of our expanded community? Our gathering here today underscores the importance of public-private partnerships in ensuring a safe and secure environment for our community. It is through these collaborative efforts that we can effectively address the significant challenges and opportunities facing our region. At Catholic University, we aim to foster a peaceful community because, after all, blessed are the peacemakers. We recognize the need to partner and collaborate with everyone in this room, so I hope you all feel very welcome here. Together, by sharing knowledge and resources, we can enhance our collective resilience and preparedness for anything that comes at us. I hope that these sessions are not only informative, but also life-saving. Thank you for being here today and for your commitment to building a safer and stronger community. Let us continue to work together to ensure a brighter and safer future for all of us. I now would like to introduce our good friend and colleague, Kathy Hollinger, President and CEO of the Greater Washington Partnership, one of the co-organizers of this event, to begin our conference with welcoming remarks. Kathy.
Good morning, everyone. Good summer, hot morning. I am Kathy Hollinger. I'm the CEO of the Greater Washington Partnership, and I am really delighted to welcome all of you to today's conference. Today's event, as the President mentioned, is a collaborative effort between 4 regional organizations. And I will underscore that is a really big deal in this region when organizations who have similar stakeholders come together to address really important issues. The Greater Washington Partnership, the Greater Washington Board of Trade, led by Jack McDougall, the Consortium of Universities of the Metropolitan Washington area, led by Andrew Flagel, and the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, led by Clark Mercer. Each of these organizations has a really distinct set of public, private, nonprofit, educational stakeholders, but at their core, all 4 are dedicated to solving shared challenges that cross our region's jurisdictional boundaries. As a result, our 4 organizations are working to revitalize and relaunch the historic Potomac Conference framework for cooperative action. I'm just curious, because I remember the Potomac Conference, who in the room remembers and participated in the Potomac Conference in the past? Well, the good news is not many, so we can make it whatever we'd like to make it. So today's event is just the first of what we aim to make a recurring series of important conversations, addressing pressing issues with a regional, collaborative, and multi-sector approach to solution development that would benefit all of us. So thank you again for being with us today. As I begin, I want to acknowledge some additional individuals and organizations who made today possible. First, of course, to President Peter Kilpatrick and the team from Catholic University for hosting us in this beautiful facility and campus. To AT&T and the team for their financial support and commitment, and to the Washington Business Journal for serving as the media partner for today's event. We could not be starting this Potomac Conference with a more vital topic. Public safety is foundational to the health of our people, health of our communities, and by extension to our regional economy. Our partners in state and local government and law enforcement, many of whom are with us today. If you can do a hand raise, you know who you all are. I know that you're all here. They have all been working diligently to address the challenging public safety trends that emerged with the onset of the pandemic. However, we know that more remains to be done. Unfortunately, we also know that our region has lagged behind many of its peers across the nation by a number of public safety measures. So this gathering is designed to facilitate cross-sector dialogue, mutual understanding, and explore innovative, actionable approaches to enhancing community safety. We do think this is critical to ensuring our region remains on a growth trajectory and creates opportunities for prosperity shared across all communities. This type of collaborative approach and problem solving is core to the work that we do at the Greater Washington Partnership. And for those of you who know us, the partnership is its first of its kind alliance of leading employers from private, nonprofit, education sectors across Maryland, Virginia, and Washington, D.C. And as a collective of leading employers, we're dedicated to building a vibrant, economically competitive, and prosperous place to live, work, and build a business. To make sure that this region, our region is a bit bigger, it's Baltimore to Richmond, continues to be competitive on the global stage. We bring, with partners like the Board of Trade, the Consortium, and COG, we bring together and further connect stakeholders from various sectors to address and tackle some of our region's most critical issues. For us to include skills development, regional mobility, infrastructure, and inclusive economic growth. Public safety underpins each of these initiatives. We can't attract talent, offer reliable transit, or grow our regional economy inclusively without this sense of shared security. As employers with business investments and employees across each jurisdiction, we are aligned behind one another and one idea, and that is that when one part of our region succeeds or falters, so do others. So on behalf of our board partners, we would not be and could not be more pleased to be able to take this collaborative approach with our partners at the Board of Trade and Consortium and COG to be able to think about these very important issues. So today's conference is going to be very interactive. So I encourage all of you to be ready to share, brainstorm, make connections with one another. We will move through a data-driven discussion on crime trends across the region, an overview of responsive strategies deployed to date, before transitioning to interactive breakout discussions exploring opportunities and collaboration. But first, to help us further lay the groundwork for today's discussion, it is my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, who joins us from the United States Department of Justice, Acting Associate Attorney General Ben Miser. He's currently the third ranking official at the DOJ. In that role, he oversees 13 components within the department, including the Civil Rights Division, the Office of Justice Programs, Office of Violence Against Women, and the Office of Community-Oriented Policing Services. Previously, Mr. Miser served in a number of senior leadership roles in his many years of service at DOJ under both the Biden-Harris and Obama-Biden administrations, including as Principal Deputy Associate Attorney General and as Counselor to the U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder. Mr. Miser also previously served as General Counsel of the United States Office of Personnel Management and as the Solicitor General for his home state of Ohio. He began his career as a clerk for Justice John Paul Stevens at the U.S. Supreme Court and for Judge Judith Rogers at the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit. I will also note that Ben has spent nearly 20 years living, and working in this great region and shares our interest in creating a vibrant, safe,
conversation, and also to Catholic University for hosting in this beautiful space. Today's discussion could not be timelier. We are experiencing a critical turning point in community safety. Last year, we saw a historic decline in violent crime at the national level, including the largest one-year drop in homicides in 50 years. Data released by the FBI just last month showed that in the first 3 months of this year, violent crime decreased by more than 15% compared to the same period last year. Murder decreased by more than 26%. This overall reduction in violent crime is encouraging news. It should inspire us all to continue promoting critical violence prevention efforts to further combat the scourge of violent crime in our communities. But despite this progress, there is still so much more work left to be done. Gun violence continues to claim thousands of lives every year. More than 48,000 people died of gunshot wounds in 2022, almost 20,000 of them by homicide. The impact of gun violence on our kids is particularly troubling. Firearms are now the leading cause of death among American children and teens. We are losing far too many promising young lives in the Washington region and across the country to senseless acts of violence. In DC alone, between January and October of 2023, 97 youth suffered gunshot wounds, a number that includes 15 homicides. Children and families in our nation's capital and across the nation deserve better. Last month, Mayor Bowser declared a public emergency regarding youth violence, authorizing emergency measures to support youth, families, and communities likely to be involved in or exposed to youth violence. We know that community violence intervention, or CVI, is a key tool in the effort to reduce violent crime and build safer communities where everyone, adults and youth alike, can thrive. That's why the Department of Justice is making unprecedented federal investments in community violence intervention. Today, I'd like to highlight just a few of those efforts, particularly those centered in our region. Their breadth and success demonstrate the importance of continued investment in community violence intervention and prevention. Over the past 2 years, the Department of Justice has invested nearly $200 million in life-saving community violence intervention strategies through what we call the Community Violence Intervention and Prevention Initiative, or CVIPI, grant program. These resources come from the annual appropriations and the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, or VISCA, which dedicated $250 million to community violence intervention over 5 years. DOJ is supporting the communities that are most heavily impacted by gun violence and ensuring that local leaders have vital tools to save and change lives. The CVIPI initiative supports community-led approaches to community safety. It engages deeply with the small group of people who are most likely to participate in or be victimized by violence. And it provides opportunities for these at-risk individuals to experience a brighter, safer, and healthier future. These community-led strategies often involve conflict mediation, workforce development, cognitive behavior interventions, street engagement, hospital-based support, and family engagement, just to name a few strategies. CVIPI grants are now supporting 76 site-based partnerships in 29 states and territories, including the District of Columbia, Maryland, and Virginia. These urgently needed resources are already paying dividends throughout the nation and in the greater Washington area. DOJ has invested $4 million in 2 CVIPI sites right here in the District of Columbia. One CVIPI grant recipient, the Alliance for Concerned Men, or ACM, is implementing a violence-free zone program in the Greenway community in Southwest DC and Southeast DC. The initiative is engaging other community-based organizations to provide restorative justice services, family supports, and mental health counseling to youth and adults who are most likely to participate in or be victims of violence. The second CBIPI grant is for Peace for DC, to expand services into 2 Ward 8 neighborhoods with high rates of gun violence. Working in partnership with established community-based organizations, Peace for DC will deliver wraparound supports designed to transform the lives of the individuals at highest risk of involvement in violence. Peace for DC also operates the DC Peace Academy, which provides hands-on training to CBI workers on the front lines of violence in DC. The Justice Department is also investing in another DC-based community organization, Mute the Violence DC, to provide conflict resolution, peer-to-peer mentorship, job preparedness, and academic support services to underserved DC youth. Mute the Violence DC is receiving DOJ support through an intermediary organization that provides both microgrant and hands-on technical assistance. That assistance helps build the capacity of smaller grassroots organizations that might otherwise face barriers to federal support. The Justice Department is also investing nearly $7.5 million in Baltimore-based CBIPI sites, including ROCA, Inc. ROCA is engaging a committee of key community and criminal justice partners that includes representation from the mayor's office, the Baltimore Police Department, state agencies, hospitals, and community partners. ROCA has also established an after-shooting protocol in partnership with the Baltimore Police Department. Under this data-driven approach, ROCA receives referrals from the Baltimore Police Department of non-fatal shooting victims, and then collaborates with relevant hospital partners, local government agencies, and other stakeholders to offer assistance and services to the victims of those shootings and their families. ROCA is also collaborating with Peace for DC to incorporate ROCA's signature Rewire Cognitive Behavioral Therapy program into DC outreach work. That program is rooted in adolescent brain development science, and it teaches young people how to slow down and become more intentional when they're reacting to stressful or traumatic situations. In addition to ROCA, DOJ is supporting the Greater Baybrook Alliance, or GBA, in Baltimore. GBA is implementing a violence reduction plan in 3 underserved neighborhoods, Brooklyn, Curtis Bay, and Brooklyn Park. As part of that plan, GBA is collaborating with MedStar Harbor Health to bolster its hospital-based violence intervention program, which is designed to reduce and prevent potential retaliatory violence by installing violence responders in ER emergency rooms and hospital centers. GBA is also working with researchers at the University of Maryland to assess the overall impact of this innovative program. Partnership is the common theme across all these CBI initiatives, and it is a core tenet of the CBI ecosystem. I am heartened to see so many law enforcement, nonprofit, education, and business leaders from across the Washington region in the room today who are committed to supporting these life-sustaining partnerships. Gun violence is a significant challenge that demands a collective solution, one that brings together community leaders and justice system actors around a shared vision for safer communities. Partnerships of all kinds are critical to violence reduction efforts, and when it comes to tackling the major issues facing our communities, public-private partnerships can serve as a force multiplier. Both the public and the private sectors bring unique assets and limitations to the table. By coming together around a shared goal, we can build on each other's strengths and create a whole that is greater than the sum of the individual parts. ACM, one of the organizations I mentioned earlier, is a prime example of the value of public-private partnerships. ACM leverages cross-sector partnerships to maximize impact in its community. That includes partnerships with the DC government, local public schools, colleges and universities, community-based and national level nonprofit organizations, and professional sports teams like the Washington Wizards and the Washington Nationals philanthropies. Similarly, Peace for DC, which I also previously mentioned, utilizes broad public-private partnerships to enhance community safety. Peace for DC is building a civic coalition of government, business, faith-based, philanthropic, and nonprofit leaders to help streamline access to needed services and brainstorm ways to decrease violence in the most impacted neighborhoods. DOJ is fostering public-private partnerships to advance public safety in other areas beyond CBI. Through the Justice Reinvestment Initiative, or JRI, DOJ has leveraged public-private partnerships to help strengthen justice system and public safety outcomes in communities nationwide. The JRI program works in partnership with the states to analyze complex criminal justice challenges, develop and implement data-driven solutions, and maximize resources to achieve stronger communities and public safety. JRI is driven by partnerships that reach across sectors, from nonprofits to philanthropy to government at all levels. For example, through JRI, the state of Maryland adopted justice system improvements that yielded more than $3.8 million in savings just from the first year. Now those funds are being reinvested in state and local efforts to reduce recidivism and improve services for survivors of crime. These examples show just a fraction of the range and breadth of CBI-PI work. They also illustrate the possibilities of what we're able to accomplish through that work, including in the Greater Washington region. They demonstrate the conversations fostered during today's convening further advance this work in the Washington region and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you, Associate Attorney General. It's good to have another Ohioan running things. Well, thank you all. I'm allowed to brag about being from Ohio. Thank you. On behalf of all of my partners, and particularly the Consortium of Universities of the Washington metropolitan area, again, welcome. As many of you know, we have 18 colleges and universities across our region in the consortium, representing nearly 300,000 students and almost 100,000 employees. So all of these issues that we work together with my partners at COG, the Board of Trade, and the Greater Washington Partnership are so important. And we collaborate together on large regional projects in access to education, in workforce development and work-based learning. We have projects in expanding workforce housing, reducing student food insecurity. And we have, for colleges and universities, you may be surprised at the extent of our footprint in public safety, which includes convening our emergency managers every month, which includes our huge collaboration that we work together on reducing gun violence in our region. And we also run the Public Safety Academy, our police academy for all the colleges and universities in Washington, as well as the Smithsonian, one of the first of its kind in the nation to focus on community-based policing. So we're so glad to be part of this particular event, and I'm especially glad for the opportunity to welcome our next speaker. Hannah Love is a fellow at Brookings Metro's Bass Center for Transformative Placemaking, where her research lies at the intersection between place, economic opportunity, and public safety. Hannah's recent work focuses on scaling community-centered economic inclusion in urban and rural markets, advancing place-based approaches to community safety, and identifying solutions to the evolving challenges of America's downtowns. Her scholarship received coverage and citations in outlets like the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, CNN, and Time. Prior to Brookings, Hannah was a research analyst at the Urban Institute's Justice Policy Center, specializing in youth justice and community-based solutions for safety. Unfortunately, Hannah did not attend any of our local universities, but proudly holds a master's degree from Columbia University, which if you can't come to ours, it's okay, and a bachelor's degree from Potomac College, both in sociology And I will tell you what I love most about Hannah's work is that it combines data with purpose, digging to find the facts behind the headlines to help inform these critical policy decisions. I'm so excited to welcome you today. Ladies and gentlemen, Hannah Love.
Thank you so much for that kind welcome. It is great to be here today. There we go. So today I'm going to be talking about the data and the crime trends that are impacting the broader Washington, D.C. region. As was mentioned before, all of the work that the Brookings Institution does around public safety is really at the intersection between economic development, public safety, and community well-being. So really examining how the challenges that are facing our region impact the broader regional economy and residents' ability to have a decent quality of life. So, as part of this talk, I'm going to start first with analyzing recent crime trends focused specifically on the Washington, D.C. region, and then I will give a little bit of a preview of some of the evidence-based approaches to reducing crime that I know we're all going to discuss later in more interactive sessions. But before we get into the raw data and the numbers, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that issues of crime and safety are incredibly personal and emotional, and that sometimes data and numbers can't always reflect or change how people feel about crime. So the quotes that you can see up here are from a research project I did with my colleague, Tracy Hayden-Lowe, back in 2022. This was a time when a lot of places were still emerging from the pandemic-era closures, and we were really in an influx of sort of questioning the future of downtowns and the future of the knowledge economy writ large. During this time in 2022, we decided to choose 4 major cities, New York City, Seattle, Chicago, and Philadelphia, and just go out and talk to folks, to talk to major employers, to talk to workers, to talk to business leaders, particularly in downtown areas, and to ask them sort of what are the biggest issues that you are facing for economic recovery of downtown. We were expecting people to say, basically the changing nature of hybrid work. People don't want to go back to work because they want to be in their pajamas and stay at home. And what we heard instead actually was that crime and fear of crime was the #1 thing that was preventing workers from wanting to return to the office. That was fear of crime both within the downtown central business district itself and also on the subway or metro in commuting to downtown. We repeatedly heard things over and over about, it feels like we're back in the 1990s again. It feels like we could get shot in places that were previously safe. There was also a perception that there had been some sort of spillover effect in which crime that had traditionally been confined to neighborhoods was now seeping into central business districts and no one was safe anywhere. In particular, it was the employers, the major employers, who said that this was the biggest barrier as well, citing crime and public safety as the #1 challenge to remaining successful. Now, it's been a couple years since 2022, and things have improved since then, and many of these trends have improved for the better, but we are also seeing new challenges such as stark increases in unsheltered homelessness nationwide, a 12% increase in the last year. So I just want to ground this conversation in these perceptions and take us a bit to the Washington, D.C. region here. So this is a poll that was conducted much more recently in 2024 by the Washington Post, and it is about perceptions of crime in the Washington, D.C. region. In 2024, 65% of D.C. residents say crime is an extremely serious or very serious problem in the district. This was also a marked increase from 2023 to 2024. And it's interesting to look at the difference between Washington, D.C. and suburban Maryland and Northern Virginia, where residents are much more likely to rate crime as a less serious problem, and that there has not been a significant increase in concerns about crime over the past year in suburban Maryland and Virginia. Moreover, residents of suburban Maryland and Virginia are more likely to feel safe in their own neighborhoods. So 44 and 64% of residents in these more suburban areas feel safe in their own neighborhoods, compared to just 23% of DC residents. That is kind of a stark statistic there. 23% of DC residents feel safe in their own neighborhood. So obviously these perceptions of crime are a very big deal for the region and for Washington, DC specifically. So if you believe many of the headlines, these perceptions of crime are going to lead to significant economic hardships for the region, including business closures and lack of talent retention, etc. A lot of these headlines, which I'm sure many of you have seen, really focus on sort of the stark increases in Washington, D.C. and the challenges that poses for economic development. And while these headlines may seem a bit fear-mongering, the region here itself actually is uniquely vulnerable to perceptions of crime in Washington, D.C. specifically. This is a regional conference, but much of the data that I will be presenting today is focused on D.C. And the reason for this, which what you can see in those two graphs that I have presented there, is that the DC region is uniquely reliant on office-based occupations compared to the rest of the nation. You can see us almost all the way on the right over there. And 30% of the region's office inventory is in the district itself. Additionally, prior to the pandemic, in 2019, 63% of all trips that ended in downtown Washington, D.C. came from outside the district. So we really are talking, when we're talking about downtown D.C. here, we are talking about the entire region. Because prior to the pandemic, the daytime population of the district increases 75% because of our suburban residents coming from Maryland and Virginia. So I just want to note that while many of these crime trends are very DC focused, this is a regional challenge and a regional challenge for our downtown specifically. All right, so to take us back to those headlines and sort of those doomsday predictions, I'm going to try to level set those with some data now, and I just want to tell a more hopeful story here while we are dealing with a lot of significant challenges. There are bright spots here and there are solutions that can exist to reduce crime and to also improve perceptions of crime. I want to be very clear here that perceptions of crime shouldn't necessarily drive policy, but they are really, really important, particularly for our economic development. So we need evidence-based solutions that work to actually enhance safety and to improve perceptions. All right. Now to the data. I'm going to start here with just a snapshot of very recent crime trends from 2019 to 2023 in Washington, D.C., and how they compare to the four other large cities that I mentioned earlier: New York City, Philadelphia, Chicago, and Seattle. So what you can see over this time period between 2019 and 2023 is that crime is way up, and it's up everywhere. In DC, violent crime in particular was up 34%, and that was the largest increase out of these five major cities. Washington, D.C. had the largest increase. Property crime trends were a bit more stable during this period. From 2019 to 2023, property crimes in Washington, D.C. only increased 2%. However, there was a 24% jump between 2022 and 2023. So the long-term arc from 2019 is okay, but we did see a big jump in property crime from 2022 to 2023. And so you can just take a minute. Now I want to take a more place-based snapshot of these crime patterns, particularly because of their role that they play in economic development. So these two graphs show the same trends, but instead they are focused only on downtowns. So here, for the purpose of this analysis, I know everyone has a slightly different definition of DC downtown. What does that mean? We included Chinatown, Penn Quarter, Downtown, Golden Triangle, and DuPont Circle. So it's a little bit broader than what some would think, but that is where the majority of the office inventory in the district is, and that's how we define downtown. So what my figures here show is that the vast majority of increases in crime in 2019, between 2019 and 2023, actually happened outside of downtowns. And just as before the pandemic, crime is concentrated in disinvested neighborhoods outside of downtowns. So in Washington, D.C., the share of violent crime that occurred downtown increased about 10% from 2019 to 2023, but that is from a very relatively low baseline. So there was not very much violent crime downtown to begin with, so a 10% increase from a low baseline still exists. And the share of property crime occurring in downtown actually went down 29%, which is quite surprising when you think about many of the headlines that we saw about retailers closing and property crimes downtown. So there really was a 29% decrease. The other hopeful thing that you can see here is out of all of the cities represented, Washington, D.C.'s downtown is actually the safest. It has the lowest incidence of crime out of the other 4 cities. And I want to just make it clear that when I point to this sort of mismatch between perceptions and realities, I'm not trying to delegitimize people's concerns about crime or to deny the impact that crime in other parts of the city can have on the downtown area, particularly perceptions. What I'm trying to make the point for is that by understanding the spatial distribution of crime within a city, we can better utilize the tools and data to solve it. I'm also not trying to blame crime on certain neighborhoods. There is an extensive body of evidence that demonstrates targeted investments in high crime communities in partnership with residents who actually live in those communities is one of the most effective solutions for combating violence. It can be a pretty serious problem if the voices of those most impacted by violence and crime are drowned out by the media, politicians, or a hyper-focused public on downtown. So if we want to take a look at some of the most serious crimes, the ones that really make people afraid, we are talking about murder here, and particularly firearm homicides. So as we've heard already, in 2023, DC was a national outlier. While most cities across the nation saw significant reductions in crime, DC saw a significant increase. So in 2023, DC had one of the highest murder rates of any major city, with 274 per 100,000 people. But when you take a look at the map on the right, you can actually see the spatial distribution of where these murders are occurring. And you can see that residents in the eastern portion of the district and alongside the border of Prince George's County have borne the brunt of the hardship from homicides, while other areas of the city remain relatively untouched. You can see entire areas there where there are no little red dots representing gun homicides. Now, this is not a new phenomenon, nor is this unique to Washington, D.C. For decades, some neighborhoods have been living under the constant threat of gun violence, and what we saw in 2023 was a worsening of murder in these neighborhoods rather than a widespread dispersal of murder across the district and the region. And the reasons for this crime concentration are structural. Decades of research in criminology shows that violent crime, particularly murder, concentrates in economically disadvantaged neighborhoods. And the proven factors that correlate with this concentration include disparities in employment outcomes, high rates of poverty, densely crowded housing, destabilization and displacement, and a deteriorating built environment, including high rates of vacant homes and lots. These factors, while not unique to DC, pose a particular troubling pattern for us. DC has the highest disparity between Black and white unemployment in the nation, and we also have one of the highest racial wealth gaps in the nation. When I'm talking about the spatial distribution of crime here as well, I want to be clear that just because crime concentrates in these neighborhoods, the vast majority of people living in these neighborhoods are not dangerous. So research shows that in most cities, less than 1% of the population is responsible for 75% of homicides. And that is true in these neighborhoods as well. And moreover, what is true is that most people who are involved as a perpetrator of homicides have previously been a victim as well. So far we haven't really gotten to the more hopeful story that I promised you. So here is the one slide that has a little bit of hope. So when you're placing the trends that I just spoke about in a long-term context, you can see that the arc of the trends are still going in the right direction. So both, over the long term, both violent and property crime are down significantly in Washington, D.C. And in fact, in 2022, Washington, D.C. had its lowest violent crime rate in 21 years. So that's a pretty big accomplishment. And so what we can also see when you look at more recent trends, which is the graph on the right there, again, this is very preliminary data. This is from 2023 to where we are in 2024 right now. But from this sort of mid-year 2024 data, we can see that crime is also going down from its 2023 peak. So crime across the board has dropped in this year, with violent crime decreasing by almost a third, 29%. And property crime decreasing by 14%. And this is also, in property crime, we've seen significant decreases in robberies and vehicle thefts. So there was a third less robberies and vehicle thefts in DC in 2024 compared to 2023. So when presenting all these numbers, there's just a few things that I want us all to keep in mind about how we can utilize them to come up with more collaborative and creative solutions together. So the first is to really pay attention to place when you are thinking about public safety. As I showed with those place-based crime patterns, different forms of crime concentrate in different places, and solutions that may work in downtown might not work in areas that have long suffered from concentrated violence. The second is that yearly fluctuations in crime trends do occur. 2023 was quite a scary year for Washington, D.C., and I understand the pressure and the response to react to that year. However, from looking at 2024, we are seeing a more positive story, and it's important to look at the longer-term arc of crime trends when crafting policy. Fluctuations do happen. Finally, as I started off saying, statistics are vital, but they don't often change hearts and minds, so there needs to be solutions that both respond to these statistics, but that also get to people's perceptions. So very briefly, I will just focus on a few evidence-based approaches that are quite broad, but I selected these approaches because they involve sort of a whole community approach. They involve people both within the criminal justice system, outside of the criminal justice system, in economic development, community development, placemaking, etc. So I'll just briefly focus on sort of 5 pillars of evidence that can be used to address both realities and perceptions of crime, but I won't get into too many details because I understand that this will be the focus of the rest of the day. Just to say here that all of the 5 pillars that I will be focused on take a social determinants of safety approach. So if you've heard of the social determinants of health, this is the idea that living a healthy life requires more than just access to quality health care. It requires investments in education, in a strong neighborhood, and other supports. So the same thing is true with safety. So the first evidence-based pillar for reducing violence is to tailor crime prevention and response resources to place-based crime patterns. So we heard a lot about this morning in things like community violence intervention, which is really focused on that small group of people who may need conflict resolution in order to avoid further violence. This can also be seen in things like focused deterrence and community-based street outreach. The same thing goes for when we're dealing with crimes that happen in areas like downtown or in tourist hubs or in places that are real activity centers for the economy. The solutions that would work in other places need to be tailored to the downtown environment. Downtown bids have been great at doing that in a lot of cases, in hiring formerly incarcerated folks to serve as downtown ambassadors to make people feel safe. So it's just really important to think about place when you are thinking about responding to crime. The second one is quite important for both perceptions and reality of crime, and it's really about addressing housing and economic security. So I didn't touch on this because I didn't have as much time, but what we heard in our interviews with the major employers that I talked about before is that people often conflate issues of crime and safety with unsheltered homelessness. and the perceptions driving people's reluctance to be in an office district had a lot to do with homelessness. So if we want to talk about perceptions, we also need to address unsheltered homelessness, and there are many tools in which we can do that for, including investing in housing of all kinds. Additionally, economic mobility is an essential component of community safety. There is a lot of evidence that summer job programs can reduce violence by as much as 45%, as can workforce development programming. And there's a lot of roles that the business community can have in sort of supporting those efforts. The third pillar is on supporting youth, and particularly their access to quality education and to third spaces. So it might be a little bit difficult to see there, but those are rates of chronic absenteeism across the region. And you can see that in Washington, D.C., over 40% of all youth were chronically absent in the 2022 to 2023 year. So first things first, if we want to address youth crime, we need to ensure access to quality education and to make sure that kids are in school when they need to be. The fourth pillar is leveraging built environment improvements and investments within the public realm to improve safety. So there is a large body of evidence that built environment improvements, from fixing abandoned buildings to increasing access to parks to improving lighting and other aspects of the public realm, are very cost-effective and effective ways to reduce crime. So a Philadelphia study found a 29% reduction in violent crime just from cleaning up vacant lots in low-income neighborhoods. And they also found a 39% reduction in firearm homicides by funding building remediations in high-crime neighborhoods. So there's a lot that can be done outside of the criminal justice sector with the built environment to make us safer. Finally, I will just close on the final pillar, which is what I'm pretty sure you're all here to talk about, which is doubling down on collaboration, governance, and sustained investment. The DC region has a lot of good things going for it when it comes to violence intervention, prevention, and response. The challenge is just keeping up the collaboration across the many different jurisdictions we have in this beautiful region, and sustaining the investment and following through with many of the great programs that we already have. So thank you all for having me here today, and I hope that some of this information was helpful for you.
Thank you to Anna and Brookings for presenting on recent crime data and reporting. A couple of quick takeaways. One, I know in all of our lines of work, having accurate and current data is really, really important. And at the Council of Governments, I'm Clark Mercer, the director of the Council of Governments, we produce an annual crime report. And one of the observations we have our public safety team here is that once that data gets sanitized and approved by different agencies at the local, state, and federal levels, we produce a crime report that is already 12 months out of date. And the instruction to our staff has been, until we can prepare and produce a report that is timely, we are doing a disservice to the region, to the businesses, to our public sector partners by not painting an accurate picture. So more on that to come, but we are working with your police chiefs, your CAOs, and your elected officials to produce a dashboard that will tell a more timely story, because just as there was the one slide deck, and this region does a good job when there's issues of calling out issues in our headlines, which we should, when there are improvements and folks are doing a good job, we need those kind of headlines as well to tell a story. We talk about perception and reality. There are things we do to influence perception, and some of those recent statistics about the dramatic decrease in serious crimes in the district is something that we should applaud, just like we should raise caution and awareness when they're going in the other direction. So more on that to come. A little bit about the Council of Governments, and as I look out, I see some of my board members and elected officials from the region, and I would be negligent, and it would be noted in my review if I did not mention my board members. So if you're here, raise your hand. Thank you for being here. The Council of Governments represents 24 local governments in and around DC, all of suburban Maryland. Oh, it's me. Oh yeah. Okay, here we go. Northern Virginia out to Loudoun, Prince William County, and the district. So it includes mayors, chairs of boards of supervisors, and representatives from our legislative bodies in the district, Maryland, and the Commonwealth of Virginia. And when you bang your head against the wall and say, I wish government would do a better job of coordinating on issue X, that is where the Council of Governments comes in. Issues that do not obey boundaries on a map: clean energy, clean water, clean air, affordable housing, transit and transportation, and public safety. I've been at the council now for a year and a half, and during onboarding, sitting with our public safety team, and Scott Boggs did a terrific job leading that team, gave me the slide deck. The Council of Governments runs 28 distinct public safety programs for this region. I was fascinated by that, and as I asked our board members and folks in the community, are you aware that we run over 24 coordinating with the public and private sector public safety programs? There was not a general awareness. So that's a good thing we run that many programs. We can do a better job on the awareness piece of that and listening to our private sector counterparts. Now, we run everything from last week. There was a chaplains conference. The chaplains from across the region coming together to talk about the difficulties of their job and how they do it. We honor correctional officers who have fallen in the line of duty every year, to the mutual aid agreement. Now, the mutual aid agreement is the legal underpinnings and rules of engagement that allow one law enforcement agency from one jurisdiction to cross jurisdictional boundaries and respond in another jurisdiction. Pretty breathtaking. The first time the mutual aid agreement was put into effect by COG was 1968, after Martin Luther King's Jr.'s assassination. Most recently and visibly on January 6th, insurrection at the Capitol, those Virginia state troopers that came over the bridge and responded to the Capitol, that call was put in by the mayor's office in D.C. to Virginia, to Richmond, to activate that agreement. That was happened because of those legal underpinnings that COG maintains. We purchase equipment that goes from ordinary equipment that you would hope as taxpayers we're leveraging the region to purchase at a better price, diesel, gas, bottled water, to Homeland Security equipment that's highly technical and very expensive and delivering cost savings for your jurisdictions. And I want to thank the partners here. I see Kathy, Andrew, Jack, your organizations coming together, public and private sector, to talk about these issues is so important. Because whether it's metro and transit, affordable housing, or climate and energy goals, what underpins so much of that is public safety, right? There's a reason why it's at the base of Maslow's pyramid of need, people feeling and being safe. And I often find myself in situations where I'm with all public sector leaders talking about these great programs that are being run and openly wondering how can we engage the private sector to be more active partners in these programs. And then I'll find myself later in the day with CEOs and leaders of businesses talking about the very same topics, talking about programs that they're running or wish that the region would run, and asking, I wish we had more communication from our public sector. Why aren't they paying attention on issue X? Why isn't this more of a priority for our elected officials? We often talk past each other in this region. And at least from the public sector side, I know we can do a better job of engaging in venues such as this and listening and being responsive. Because the one commonality in those meetings is folks want a safer region. And it is, one of the CEOs recently said, I want this to be what my elected official goes to bed at night thinking about and gets up the next morning thinking about it. The comment suggests that perhaps that's not the priority for elected officials. I'm here to tell you that it is, but we can do a better job of listening and being responsive. So part of that is getting folks together on a panel, which is coming up now, to talk. And we've got our Metropolitan Police Department Chief Smith here with us, our WMATA Transit Chief Gonzalo, and I'll tell you, Chief Smith has a great story and great data to share. Our WMATA transit system, one of the most undersold assets about our transit system, is the eyes on the street, not only on the rail lines, but on the bus lines. And the number of crimes that get mitigated or solved because of that coordination with Chief Smith, with WMATA, is fascinating to me. Our Catholic University of America President Kilpatrick and our esteemed moderator for this panel, President and CEO of Destination DC, Elliot Ferguson, will moderate this discussion. And if you're not following Mr. Ferguson online on social media, you need to be, because the numbers that DC is putting on the board of folks coming in by the millions to visit DC, and the number of events that are just seamlessly executed is breathtaking. And I would just say, it's perception means a lot. I was in Atlanta last week for a national conference, regional conference, and a lot of transit operators, a lot of folks that run tourism authorities. And they said, man, we love your metro system in DC. It's the cleanest, it's the safest, and it's the most intuitive transit system in the country. So if y'all could come up to DC, we're having a conference next week, and share that with folks, that would be helpful. But I would just say we need to do a better job of sharing our great stories and our great accomplishments in the region, and holding each other accountable to do better. So with that, welcome the panel up next to the stage, and thank you for being here.
Good afternoon, everyone. Almost. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you very much for the kind words in terms of tourism and the economic impact of tourism, and equally as much perception versus reality. And that's something in which I have to deal with on a regular basis in selling Washington as a destination. Now, it's great to be here with this esteemed panel, but one thing I say on a regular basis about Washington is that we've got a 495 mentality. I call it the bubble effect, whereas we think that, yes, we have our issues, but everybody wants to come to Washington. Why aren't we the #1 most visited city in the United States by folks from outside of the region? And the reality is we're #8. And the shock within the bubble mentality is that how can we be #8? We've got so much to offer. And I was like, well, who do you think #1 through 7 is? And then they start naming cities like New York and Miami and Orlando and Vegas and San Francisco and Los Angeles and Honolulu. And I was thinking, we're after them. Well, who do you think is after us, other major cities in the country? So as we look at promoting Washington as a destination, we're competing against a whole lot of destinations. And in that regard, we deal with a whole lot of issues as it pertains to how the global community perceives Washington and the United States as a destination. I have offices in 8 different countries, and every single time I'm in a different country, the first question they ask me about is crime in America, and why that will deter their interest in coming to America. Specific side of the United States, it's the violence pertaining to mass shootings. But when you hear the data that was shared earlier in terms of the number of shootings in America, perhaps in an annual year, that number would really scare people away. So we have our work cut out for us as it pertains to giving people a perception of safety in Washington, D.C. and in America, and that is a deterrent from economic development perspective in terms of people physically coming here. The good news is that we've got a great destination, and the good news is that things are moving in the right direction in terms of crime in Washington, D.C. as a whole. We now are hosting NATO, which is why I was slightly late getting here. I forgot that I had to get around a whole bunch of closures, so thank you for that. There's always that perception of, is Washington going to be the right destination to host an event like that? Now, we know we can do it, but the global community has a different perception. So it's a pleasure to have Chief Smith, President Kilpatrick, and Chief Anzalo to kind of share more along the lines of what they've been hearing today, and equally as much some of the things that have been happening in Washington. So Chief Smith, you're sitting right next to me. You and I have not had a chance to connect. I said I give you a chance to get settled in, and maybe we'll talk a little bit more about tourism, but I talk to your team on a regular basis, and I'm curious as to some of your reactions to some of the information you've been hearing today.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me here. I'm actually coming up on 1 year as of the 17th of this month in my role as Chief of Police, and I want to say that we're moving in the right direction when it comes to how we are addressing crime here in the District of Columbia. I will say, you know, oftentimes I do believe that perception becomes the reality. I do believe that. But I also know that we have been very intentional about how we have been addressing crime since last year. And I can speak very pointedly about the things that we've been doing in the Metropolitan Police Department in collaboration with partners, businesses, members in our communities, the residents in our communities, to really drive down crime across the District of Columbia. I think last year at this time we were seeing a very significant spike in robberies and carjackings. I'm very happy to say today that we are seeing a 47% reduction in carjacking here in the District of Columbia. And we're also seeing a 31% reduction in robberies across the District of Columbia. Those seem to be the key areas where people were feeling unsafe and uncomfortable. Our team, and I'm sitting next to the president here, and one of the things that I did last year when I first arrived, 1 month after being in the role when the students were coming back to school, I made it my point that my business to come to the campus to talk to the oncoming students for this academic year and their parents, to ensure that they knew that we, members of the Metropolitan Police Department and the law enforcement community, were doing everything we can to ensure that their children who are coming to our district government campuses and universities here in DC will feel safe and will be safe. And I am happy to say that violent crime today in the District of Columbia is down 30%. And you should practice. And I say that because there's still so much more that we have to do. And I think that having conferences such as this, to hear from the businesses about what you need from the Metropolitan Police Department, the work that we continue to do with WMATA is really impressive to me. I heard you talk about your role of being the chair of the board of COG, and one of the things that I was impressed with is how we have really merged our relationships with all the law enforcement partners here in the region. And it's impressive to watch. You talk about maybe 10 or 11 or 12, but I also have colleagues across the entire United States of America. And we are always having the same conversations that you're having, and keeping in mind that we're also residents of the places where we actually have responsibility, or an area of responsibility for crime and different activities that are going on within our respective areas. But we have a responsibility to also want to live in safe spaces, and that's why it's so very important to me. And that's why coming into this role, I've made it my business to be boots on the ground. And what that means is in community, walking in community, talking with community members, businesses, to ensure. You want to talk about economic development, being a part of the space for economic development by holding conferences here in the District of Columbia. I held our first women's conference in March, and we brought in women and men from across the United States to be a part of the Metropolitan Police Department's first women's conference. And we had women from all across the U.S. here in D.C. And so that's a part of the economic development. I have another plan for economic development. We also have Pride that's coming up in World Pride 2025 right here in D.C. And it's our responsibility to ensure that we are keeping our visitors and keeping our residents safe. And so what I would say about data is very important, because I use intelligence-led data to determine how we will create initiatives and the strategies that we put in place to address crime in D.C. And I can tell you, our officers at the Metropolitan Police Department are very passionate about this work. There have been laws and legislation that has been passed to really assist us. I applaud Mayor Bowser for her efforts and her support with policing, changing policy, the DC Council working with us in public safety to ensure that we have a policy-led environment that will allow my officers to be able to freely patrol with policies and barriers in place. Don't get it twisted. But ensuring that we are top of mind. Public safety is what we're looking at, and the reason why you see the decrease in crime. I also give credit to the residents, the community, how we are approaching our communities very differently than the way we've approached them in the past. When we talk about our public safety cluster, our violence interrupters, all of these grassroots organizations, everybody is engaged in public safety here across the District of Columbia. And the one reason why I believe is because everybody has been sick and tired of the things that have been happening over the past years. We saw crime increasing roughly around 2019, 2020. It continues to increase, and we reached that epicenter of crime as of last year. And I had one task to do. And I still have that same task to do, and that's to drive down crime in the district. And I'm excited about being here with my esteemed colleagues so that we can share with you some of the things that we've been doing here in the district.
No, I appreciate your detailed answer, and I'm going to ask you a follow-up question. You're in a room with your colleagues from Boston, Chicago, Philadelphia, San Francisco, and you all are, at the end of the day, no microphones, no media, and you all are talking about your jobs. What does that conversation look like or sound like?
I think the conversation sounds like, for us and for me and the colleagues that I've had the opportunity to speak to, is what can we do to support one another? Like, what initiatives are you addressing in your area that you've launched that can help us become more safer here in DC? I'll use, for example, the Real-Time Crime Center, right? I've had the opportunity to speak to many colleagues across the U.S., and some of them have stood up real-time crime centers, and I was like, I wonder why we don't have a real-time crime center. Let me travel around to some of my other places across the U.S., meaning Atlanta, and also there's the real-time crime center out in Vegas and other places, where we can actually see how this could be the emerging effort of bringing all of our law enforcement programs here in the District of Columbia, in this region, under one umbrella. And as you noticed, in April of this year, we launched our Real-Time Crime Center. We're very excited about that. So those conversations are really about how can we help each other, even though San Francisco, Chicago, Philadelphia, and New York, I speak to Commissioner Cabot on a regular basis. When we had the protests and demonstrations here at GW, I mean, same thing. What are we doing in our respective law enforcement agencies across the U.S. so that we can make sure that we're keeping our city safe?
Thank you for that. So as we look at crime, safety, perception, I represent an industry destination marketing organization that really focuses on promoting Washington as a whole. There's an association for everything. There's an association for my peers. We're meeting next week in Tampa. We used to talk about restaurants opening and how great it is, and new hotels and attractions and things that are important to us. Now we talk about sustainability and homelessness, and what are we going to do to play a role in converting office space to housing and other issues like that, politics, visas. But we also talk about new opportunities to bring visitors to our city, and one of those areas is tied to educational-based tourism. There's cities like Boston that are known for being attractive, whereas global citizens will come for vacation, bring their families, and while they're there, they want to attend or do tours of different universities. So President Kilpatrick, in your space, listening to the conversations today that are relevant to all of us that live in Washington, and not only focusing on the university and why it's such a great place to gain additional education, what things are you having to deal with that are different as it pertains to some of the issues that are being spoken about today?
Well, as you might imagine, everyone wants to know, is this a safe, secure place? And we get asked a lot of questions. I mean, the media broadcasts some of our challenges. So we have to respond to that, and we have to be forthright about that. And I think one of the greatest things that we've done in the last year, and I thought Chief Smith really brought it out, is we've begun to collaborate and have a conversation around how do we help each other raise awareness. Everyone in this room wants exactly the same thing. We want a safe and secure environment so that we can, people can feel safe. The point was made that safety is not just a reality, it's a perception, and people want to feel safe. And I think when the entire community comes together, and you said it, public, private, businesses, universities, residents, when everyone comes together and begins to communicate the reality, the data that shows how are we doing crime-wise, and then specifically, what can I do? What can I do to help? What can I do to support Chief Smith or Chief Gonzalo? What can I do to support the residents of Brookland? When people really begin to get engaged, then I think really good things happen. And I want to applaud Chief Smith for some of the policy that has been critical. And I think there was a public groundswell that led to that. And I really salute you. She's been there for me every moment, from the moment she took office and coming and speaking to our students. We had an incident in early April. She called me. We spent nearly an hour on the phone. She was helping me understand a lot of the real-time data that somehow you don't always get in the media. So I see tremendous progress being made, not just in public safety, but in the entire community collaborating to raise awareness about public safety, and then to identify specific ways in which we can act to make us all feel safer and for the reality to be true. And I think when the whole community comes together, and that's why I'm excited about this conference. To my knowledge, this is maybe the first time in many years where a very significant cross-section of both the public and the private actors in the greater region have gotten together to speak about public safety. But we need to do this more often. And the last thing I would say is the trend line that was shown on the graph of how has violent crime and property crime trended over the last 30 or 40 years here in Washington is an encouraging sign. But I'd love to hope we can stop that. But in any case, I'd love to see us drive that to zero, because I think that's what we all want for the region. But our students, our prospective students and their parents, they all want to know, will my sons and daughters be safe in Washington, D.C.? Now, there are many of our students who come from metropolitan regions who are maybe a little inoculated to the media buzz about public safety, and they're pretty savvy when it comes to using the metro and getting around. But then we have a lot of other students that we're trying to recruit to the region who maybe come from rural parts of the country or the Midwest, and they want to know. They want to know, how do I know my child will be safe? So we have to respond to that.
Is that now a part of the onboarding as, again, priorities change when you have new students coming on? How has perception and or the constant barrage of questions about safety changed how you onboard with new students?
Yes, so I want to make one more shout out to our chief of police here at our university, Kirk McLean, who's over in the corner, Commander McLean. So Kirk has worked very closely with MPD, with Chief Smith, with her division district commanders, with the Transit Authority Police. And what we do is we try to communicate to our students everything that the region is doing, which is significant. The change in policy, the decline in both violent and property crime, but also everything that's happening here on campus. So, for example, we have several hundred security cameras. We've secured nearly all of our buildings with badge-in. We do not want to put a fence around our community, because that sends the wrong signal to the neighborhood that we don't want to be part of the community, but we do want to be part of the community. In fact, we want the Brookland neighbors to be part of our solution to making the neighborhood safer. So there's very little crime actually on our campus, but there's some crime in the near neighborhood, and then if you go a little bit farther, there's a little more crime. And so we're really trying to reach out to the neighbors all around campus to partner with them. And one of the suggestions I'm going to make is I know there's a program in Philadelphia called the University City District Ambassadors, which is a great program, and it really involves volunteers to help just raise awareness in the greater neighborhood about public safety and connect that, really provide that connective tissue so that the neighborhood doesn't feel like a bunch of isolated homes and families, but it really feels like a neighborhood. And we know that that leads to lower crime. So communicating all that to our new students and the parents of our prospective students is an important part of our program.
Refreshing to hear. Thank you for sharing that. And, Chief Anzalo, nothing happens in Washington, D.C. in terms of bringing visitors to the city without Metro. No matter how or whatever perception the Washingtonians have of Metro, which is mostly good, the global community is that it's the best system in the United States, and I agree. I was on Metro yesterday, had a meeting in Upper Northwest DC, and it was the easiest way to get there. And it was clean, it was safe, all the things that I experienced before I moved here. The biggest issue we've heard over the last 4 years with Metro, outward facing, would be fare jumpers. I would imagine that there are larger issues as it pertains to the subject today that you and your team have had to deal with, and I'd love to hear your perspective.
Absolutely, and thanks for having that, I appreciate that. So, and to your point, so fare evasion, I think many of y'all here in the region know that the DC Council passed a law in 2019 to decriminalize fare evasion. Mr. Clark, when he got here as a general manager almost 2 years ago, we all knew it was a problem. I think many of y'all knew it was a problem. So Mayor Bowser, we worked with Mayor Bowser, her office, as well as Councilman Defense and the DC Council, and they reversed that. So fare evasion, it's still a civil citation initially here in the district, but it mirrors Montgomery County's law where if you don't cooperate with the citation, the police officer will be arrested. So when we started enforcing that again in the transit police industry, they call it point of entry policing. So if you enforce fare evasion in your crime, basically on the system, whether it be rail or bus goes down. And that's what we experienced. So we saw, so far this year, we mirrored what Chief Smith said, we're down about 28% in overall crime on Metro compared to last year. Obviously, our biggest drivers last year were actually stolen cars. I don't know if anybody's familiar with the social media thing. I'm not, but I know a lot of people are. But there was a TikTok video or something that went out telling people how to steal keys and Honda, and guess what happened? So, parking garages got hit hard, most of the cars stolen were keys and Honda. It went up so bad, it's the worst probably that we've ever seen in the country. And I know the region was feeling it too. I mean, Chief Smith, my counterparts in Prince George's, Montgomery County, Fairfax, Alexander, and Arlington were all seeing the same thing, and keys and Hondas were doing the same. So we work closely with all of our jurisdictional partners in law enforcement. With the fare evasion, our enforcement's obviously gone up. We're up probably about 141% this year compared to last year. So, our arrests are way up and our citations are way up too, and subsequently our crime has gone down quite a bit. But like I said, working with our regional partners, we started a program a year and a half ago where we were paying overtime for our jurisdictional partners who wanted to sign up to work in some of our metro stations because, like every other police department in the region, we're suffering from recruiting problems. So, we're down. We're authorized 472 officers for the transit system, and the transit system traverses Prince George's, Montgomery, Washington, D.C., Fairfax, Loudoun, Alexandria, Arlington. And it's about 1,500 square miles, and you divide, so many officers up over 3 shifts for that, there's not a lot of police officers, basically. So in order to augment that, while we're trying to catch up with hiring, we entered into agreements with Chief Smith, Metropolitan Police, where they're at our stations during rush hour. We basically used, statistics, sort of data-driven, what everybody's talking about, to identify which were our highest crime stations, and that's where we got the extra help. So DC's in 5 stations here in the district. Cheverly, Greenbelt, Arlington, Alexandria have also signed on with us, as well as Metropolitan Washington Airport Authority. So they've also signed on with us. The other thing we did too that was a little bit unusual, in policing, we contracted with private security officers. So we identified the top 25 stations, where, particularly in the district, we had to start in the district first because the regulations in Maryland and Virginia, it's a little harder for special police officers to get tri-state certification. So most of the district has probably, at least in this region, the largest component of private security officers in the region. So their system, working with the district, was a lot easier to get that contract through. So you'll see it now that you'll see special police officers on trains in the district and at 25 stations. So, like everybody reiterated up here, it's really not one thing that works. It's a number of things that you put into place to try to do it. So I mean, when you look at our crime, even though it was up last year, so we base our crime most places because they're not, they're residential and geographically located with high residential. So they configure their crime by per 100,000 residents. It's a little hard for transit to do that. We don't have any residents. People live around Metro, but they don't live in the Metro. Well, sometimes they don't. So we base ours on per million rides. So when you look at our crime, and I know the statistics, but we don't want to get too far into it, but just sort of your point, Metro is pretty safe, so we average about 5.5 serious crimes per million rides. So if you equate that out to like per 100,000, it's, do the math, I'm a policeman, so I'm not real good at it. It's less than 1%, when you look at the entire year. And really, it's really partnerships that we've developed, with our regional partners, with our riders, Riders Advisory Council. We're doing more outreach in communities. We have a crisis intervention team that tries to address some of the substance abuse, homeless problems that you see out there on the system. And we're trying to make those connections with kids, particularly at an early age, to see that there is a pathway to a bright future of employment. So it's a lot of things that, our general managers put a lot of things in place. I mean, we still have our issues that we have to deal with, on the system, as many of you all have probably seen. One of the things we also did, we take a problem-oriented policing approach, which is, kind of what everybody up here does. It's been around since the 70s. It's tried and true, and it works. So we look at a crime from a victor, offender, and location type standpoint. If we can influence one of those three things, then, the likelihood of having a crime here. That's our overriding philosophy. And it's really about collaboration and working together. We do take sort of what Hannah referenced in her study. We don't take a one-size approach fits all. I don't think Chief Smith or any of the law enforcement folks do. We do it based on an analysis of that particular location and what's going on there. And we try to work with stakeholders because the police, we can come in and we can stabilize a location or a train line, but we have to move on to the next thing. So it's really up to the community, the business community, legislatures, and I'm not going to leave out the prosecutors and judges. They have to take ownership of a lot of this stuff. And that's sort of where we're at. So, yeah, I mean, definitely a success story is working with the council, and Mayor Bowser, I can't say enough about her, and Mr. Clark, really turning the corner on verification, and that has helped definitely drive all content.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And one thing that, I moved here in December 2001, right after 9/11, and the overwhelming reaction from family was, why would you move to Washington? Because it's not safe. Being in tourism, tourism is not about safety, especially back then, but it is, because when people don't want to come, if they feel that a destination is not safe, they're not going to come. If there is a terrorist attack in Paris, Washington will get cancellations from groups coming to Washington because they think that we are a target. Arguably, we are. But what people don't know is about the Police Coordination Act. The 32 federal law enforcement agents that work with DC Police Department that are all working in tandem for safety because there's so many different agencies. And I'd love to hear from you, Chief Anzello, and then continued with Chief Smith, how you all work collectively. I think it's important that we are talking about safety and looking at the perception and reality of crime. But when we're selling Washington, when we're promoting Washington as a destination, we're giving them some sense, or visitors a sense, that they are safe because these organizations are in place.
No, that's a great point. So we are a member along with Chief Smith in particular when it comes to terrorism. Obviously, the biggest threat in transit, at least for us right now, is an active shooter, whether it be state-sponsored, domestic, or just an individual that has some mental health issues. I mean, that's the biggest concern for us in transit right now. And then there's state-sponsored terrorism and domestic terrorism. Being in this region with all the federal assets that are here, we have 15 bomb dogs that we will utilize. MPD has a huge contingent of bomb dogs as well, but if the feds need it, or Fairfax, Maryland, Montgomery County, then we'll help them. So we share regional assets that way. And basically, you brought up the mutual aid agreement. We utilize that as well. The other thing too, we work closely with the FBI and the JTTF. We also have a chem bio unit within Metro to mitigate any type of chem bio radiological type effort. We work jointly with the FBI on that, as well as out of Quantico with that. You'll see sometimes in our station, you'll see these odd-looking machines. Those are chem bio type. They analyze air. TSA comes and pulls them out every day, and they see what type of pathogens or anything else are in our stations or around our stations. So there's a huge coordinated effort around terrorism, particularly critical infrastructure like Metro. We do exercises with Chief Smith and her team every year, the DC Fire Department, as well as our local partners. Different scenarios. Some are active shooter, chem bio, some are just derailments, that sort of thing. But it's really to get the local law enforcement agencies in the area, as well as the fire departments, as well as the federal agencies, acclimated to a metro subway environment, because it's very dangerous when you go down there. You have electricity, it's a very unforgiving environment with these trains, and people can be killed pretty easily down there. So it's been an ongoing effort. I think it all crystallized probably, like you pointed out, after 9/11, and it's with COG and the region, we've just been trying to own. Hopefully it never happens, but try to do this prepared for that.
And there are actually 32 agencies, please not discuss, 32 agencies that work together that focus on safety in Washington, D.C. In most major cities, you have the sheriff, local police department, maybe transportation police departments, but 32 here. Chief Smith, I'd love to hear, because I've been in the command center when we've had major events and an accident or things happening in Washington, your perspective on how we all work together.
Well, one of the things that we do, the Metropolitan Police Department, we host a bi-weekly law enforcement partners meeting. Every other week, we meet with all of our law enforcement partners, and we send out about 42 invites. As you know, here in the Metropolitan Police Department, we really can't do anything without our law enforcement partners, and that includes the federal agencies, our state agencies, as well as our regional local partners that are in this area. What's really key for me, we have NATO in town this week. The preparation process don't start the day before the dignitaries arrive. We are planning as soon as a notification or the discussion about what major event is going to take place here in the district. Our circular partners with Potomac, certainly federal partners, U.S. Secret Service, U.S. Capitol Police, U.S. Park Police. We are very, very intentional about making sure that we are meeting almost, if not weekly. At that point, we move our meetings to almost every day to ensure that we have closed all the gaps, any intelligence information that we're receiving from other police agencies, not just here in the region, but also external to the region. We have our intelligence branch that is really tasked with international and domestic terrorism, as Chief Gonzalez stated. But more importantly, I think for me, when it comes to how we work together. It's being able to pick up the phone in the middle of the night at any time, any time of the day, any time of the night, to ensure that we are collaborating with each other. I think right after 9/11, we all realized how important it is for us to have an incident command structure, a system in place for police agencies. So when we invite other police agencies here to support us, we're all operating under the same incident command structure, because that helps us to determine who's in charge, who has the lead, who's second in command, without having any infighting. And that's one of the things that's unique about the District of Columbia, is that we know the structure, and when we invite our partners in, we know that we're going to have exactly what we need to ensure that we keep the city safe. To talk about NATO a little bit, the NATO summit, we have dignitaries from 34 countries that are here today, will be coming in today, and it's important to us that we keep our city safe. We're asking everyone, if you can, to please take mass transit, because getting around the district these next couple of days will be very challenging. But that doesn't happen by way of just the Metropolitan Police Department. We recognize that we are the city's police agency, but yet at the same time, not having other partners in this space will create vulnerabilities for us, and we recognize that. And so I employ and respect the level of leadership that we have across all of our police agencies to help support us in the space of keeping the district safe.
And I really appreciate that, the relationship with all the policing agencies. We were at an event promoting World Pride 2 weeks ago in London at the Ambassador's House, and that particular day, getting around London is hard on any given day. But the Emperor of Japan was in town. The city was completely gridlocked. And so people were forced to take the tube. In Washington, D.C., hosting an event like NATO and major events like that, yes, there may be some heartburn in particular areas of the city, but we are equipped to be able to manage the expectations of visitors that are coming to the city because of both your organizations.
And we have to, right? We've heard some, backlash, if you will, about not being able to get around, but it's for a small period of time, but certainly to keep everyone safe. What I can also say is that, we're getting ready to go we're in an election year, right? And that's another point of contention that we also have to be mindful of. We're not going to wait until November, right? We have to start planning now. The team is teed up. I've had conversations with our team, and then that team will start internally, and then we will branch out externally to our external partners to determine what is going to be the need here in the District of Columbia, especially on election night. Right, I have to remain apolitical in this, and so I'm not going either direction, so don't ask me. What I will say is that what's important to me and top of mind to me is that we keep our visitors, our residents, especially our residents during the election period safe, and I think we have a good plan in place in order to do that.
Great to hear that. So, President Kilpatrick, you have the last question. So you're in a room with other university presidents, and you all are talking about curriculum and all the things that I hope you will be talking about that are tied to a successful university. And then the topic of crime and the destinations in which those universities are in comes up. What types of conversations are you having with domestic university presidents? And then take it to a global level, because it's a totally different attitude globally. When we are doing what we are doing in terms of promoting Washington, the first question that I'm asked is something that I cannot control, none of us can control, is why don't we change our gun laws? And they don't understand it, because that would change a lot of things. We have an office in Australia, and they share with us what happened there in New Zealand. Tell me how those conversations are with your domestic peers and your international peers in terms of safety on campus.
Well, we have a very tight-knit group of consortium Washington area presidents, ably led by Andrew Flake, of free inquiry, of academic freedom, and of freedom of expression, and of civil discourse. And so balancing all of that against public safety and security is an interesting challenge, but it's what universities have to be about. When we go international, I do hear a lot of, why doesn't the U.S. get its act together and do something about violent crime? Because I do believe we have a relatively unique situation in this country, vis-a-vis the right to bear arms and what that means in terms of the kinds of weapons a private individual can own. I don't quite understand why we haven't modified some of our gun laws. Candidly, I don't see the need for rapid fire weaponry in the hands of very many of our individuals. And I'll opine a little here. The origin of the right to bear arms was really to protect the citizenry from its own government. Well, when the government has nuclear weapons, what sense does the right to bear arms make in terms of, what do you mean, protecting yourself against the government? Now, do we have the right to bear arms to hunt in rural areas? Sure, I suppose, but do you need an AK-47? I mean, come on. So I think there's a real need just for some rationality in terms of our gun laws. And there have been many good proposals made, many good ones, and I would support a lot of those. So I hope, as the country continues to grapple with violent crime, and we heard a wonderful talk about from the Attorney General about violent crime intervention. But as we continue to grapple with it, I hope we'll also continue to bring gun law reform into the forefront of the consciousness of our citizenry.
So I just want to add one thing that I think I failed to omit is that since I'm in an environment with private industry, businesses, one of the things that we launched with the Real-Time Crime Center is the ability to be able to connect your cameras. To date, we have about 39,000 cameras that are connected to our Real-Time Crime Center through Camera Connect DC. We are asking you, your partners, your businesses, please connect your cameras to our Real-Time Crime Center. Why? Because it's the eyes, and sometimes the ears, of what's happening within across the District of Columbia with businesses. I think Chief Anzalo stated it very clearly that, we're all, as law enforcement agencies across the U.S., dealing with shortages of personnel. And one way to really advance how we can measure what's happening in different places is being able to connect your cameras with our Real-Time Crime Center. Last month, we launched our drone program, which is, again, another tool that we will be using for emerging technology to really address crime across the district. And then we also kind of deployed our newest apparatus for our helicopter, which has a unique capabilities, and it's so much more faster when it comes to what the technology was we were using before. So I just wanted to just put a plug out there for you. If you have businesses, mom and pop stores, we really want to use your cameras to be connected to our Real-Time Crime Center, so when things are happening, we can get our officers there a lot quicker, and we can also see what's happening in real time in order to keep our businesses and our establishments safe. So that's all I wanted to add.
Thank you for sharing. And President Kilpatrick, your comments don't go on deaf ears. I think we all agree with your statements, and hopefully right down the street, the consortium of universities and others will continue to focus on what makes sense in terms of safety in America, which is really tied to too many guns, but that's another panel. One thing I'd like to add as we conclude, folks that live in the suburbs are the worst who are having folks come to Washington, D.C. Every single time I hear about someone who's coming, well, I want to come in, but my friend that lives in this city says it's not safe. So, present company excluded, I'm confident. One of the things that I hear when we meet with our peers in other cities is that folks that live outside of our major cities are the worst at making folks feel as if they should come into a destination. So I want to conclude with that as I thank Chief Smith, Chief Anzalo, President Kilpatrick for your insight on this panel, and we continue on with the program. And thank you to Jack McDougall and to Kathy and others that have put this together today. Thank you very much.